Imagine sacrificing your life's biggest dream for love, only to be betrayed in the worst way possible. Would you ever forgive someone who destroyed everything you worked for? Tell me in the comments. The walls of Sophia's apartment were lined with medical textbooks, the air thick with the scent of ink and old paper. A single lamp cast a glow over the acceptance letter resting on her desk, the hospital's logo printed boldly at the top. Her name was written beneath it in clear, unmistakable letters: Dr. Sophia Matthews, accepted into the residency program at Westbridge Medical. A dream that had taken her years to build, finally within her grasp. She traced the edge of the paper with her fingers, heart pounding with anticipation. It wasn't just an offer. It was the beginning of everything she had sacrificed for. The countless sleepless nights, the exams that had drained every ounce of energy from her, the sacrifices her parents had made to put her through school. It was more than just a career. It was her future. But then came a voice, deep and smooth, cutting through her thoughts. "Come here," Daniel called from the kitchen, his tone light, teasing. "You've been staring at that letter for hours. Come eat with me." She turned, catching sight of him leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up, a glass of wine in his hand. His dark eyes watched her with something unreadable, his lips curving into that easy smile that had captivated her from the beginning. He always had a way of making everything feel simple. Sophia pushed the letter aside and walked toward him, letting the warmth of his embrace settle around her as he pulled her close. "You know," he murmured, pressing a kiss against her forehead. "You don't have to take it." Her body tensed. "What?" He pulled back slightly, his hand still resting on her waist. "I'm just saying. I make more than enough for both of us. You don't have to stress yourself with 80-hour work weeks. We could start our life now, build something together, a family." The words settled over her like a weight, heavy and unexpected. "But this is what I've always wanted," she said carefully. "You know that." "And I want you to be happy," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But what kind of life would that be? You'd barely have time for anything outside of the hospital. You'd be exhausted all the time. We wouldn't get to travel, wouldn't have time to enjoy each other. I'm just saying, we could have a different kind of happiness, one that doesn't involve you running yourself into the ground for a job." A job, that's what he called it, as if it were something small, something replaceable. Her fingers curled against his shirt. "Daniel, I worked for this. You know how hard I—" "And you succeeded," he cut in, his voice gentle, persuasive. "You proved you could do it. You have nothing to prove to anyone, least of all yourself. But wouldn't it be better to focus on us now? To have a life that doesn't revolve around stress and deadlines?" Sophia swallowed, her thoughts spiraling. He had always been supportive, always told her how proud he was, how much he admired her dedication. And yet now, with her dream within reach, he was asking her to let it go. She looked at him, at the man she loved, the man she had planned to spend forever with. "I just don't want you to regret it," he said, voice soft, laced with concern. "I don't want you to wake up years from now and realize you missed out on a real life, a happy one. A happy one." As if her career would take that away from her. Doubt crept in. She had always known the life of a doctor was demanding, that it would be years before she could settle into anything resembling normalcy, that she would miss birthdays, anniversaries, quiet moments. That exhaustion would become an old friend. And then there was Daniel, steady, successful, offering her something different, something easier. She inhaled deeply, the air suddenly too thick, too heavy. "You won't regret it," he promised, squeezing her hands. "I'll take care of everything. You'll never have to worry about a thing." The words settled in her chest, twisting, turning. "But what if everything," Daniel said. was a lie. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen as Sophia stood over the stove, stirring a pot of homemade stew. The rhythmic bubbling was almost hypnotic, a mindless task that gave her something, anything, to focus on. She had never spent this much time in the kitchen before, never thought she'd be the kind of woman who waited for her husband to come home while dinner simmered on the stove. She turned, glancing toward the dining table. A bouquet of lilies sat in a glass vase, fresh from this morning's trip to the market. She had spent extra time arranging them, making sure they stood just right, anything to distract herself from the quiet that now filled her days. Her hands stilled on the spoon as a faint chime echoed through the apartment. A text message. Her gaze flickered toward the living room, where Daniel sat on the couch, phone in hand. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second. Then he smiled, just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough for something cold to press against Sophia's chest. She watched as his fingers moved across the screen, typing fast, erasing, typing again. The glow from the phone illuminated his face, a soft flicker against his sharp features. Another message, another smile. Her fingers tightened around the spoon. "Who's that?" Her voice came out lighter than she expected, careful, almost casual. Daniel barely looked up. Just work, the same answer he always gave. She turned back to the stove, stirring absent-mindedly. It was easier to pretend she hadn't noticed the way his expression changed, the way his body tensed slightly before answering. The sound of footsteps approached, and then his arms wrapped around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Smells amazing," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. She forced a smile. "It'll be ready in a few minutes." His arms tightened slightly before he pulled away, grabbing a glass from the counter. "I might have to fly out tomorrow. There's a client in Chicago who needs me." Another trip. Sophia turned off the burner, inhaling deeply. "You've been traveling a lot lately," Daniel chuckled. "That's business, sweetheart. You know how it is." She nodded, but something about his tone. It was too smooth, too practiced. They ate in near silence, the occasional clinking of silverware against plates, the only sound between them. Daniel scrolled through his phone between bites, his attention elsewhere. Sophia watched him, a growing heaviness pressing against her ribs. This wasn't how she pictured marriage. When they were dating, he had been full of energy, always making her laugh, always pulling her close, as if he couldn't stand to be apart for even a second. Now, most nights were like this, quiet, distant, as if she had become nothing more than background noise. And yet every time she questioned it, he had an answer, a reassurance, a kiss on the forehead, a promise that nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. A week passed, then another. The distance between them grew. Daniel's trips became more frequent. His goodnight kisses became shorter, and his phone was never left unattended. One evening, while folding laundry, Sophia found something that made her stomach twist. A shirt, one of Daniel's favorites, reeking of an unfamiliar perfume. A floral scent, light and expensive, nothing she owned. She held it in her hands, staring at it, waiting for her mind to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe someone at the office had hugged him. Maybe it was from the hotel he had stayed in. Maybe... The front door opened. Daniel walked in, dropping his keys on the table. He looked up, smiling, but when he saw the shirt in her hands, the smile faltered. "Hey," he said, setting his briefcase down. "What's wrong?" Sophia held up the shirt. "Whose perfume is this?" His brows furrowed, and then just as quickly, he let out a light chuckle. "Seriously?" He stepped forward, taking the shirt from her hands. "You think I'm cheating because of a smell?" She folded her arms. "It's not mine," he sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Sophia, come on, it's probably from a coworker. People hug, you know. Her stomach churned. It's not the first time, Daniel. You're gone all the time. You're always on your phone. Your passwords are changed. You never used to lock your phone. He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. You're overthinking. Just focus on our home, babe. Focus on their home. On the lilies in the vase. On the dinner she made. On the quiet life she had been left with while he was where? With who? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Daniel stepped closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I love you. Don't let silly thoughts get in your head, okay? She nodded slowly. But was she really overthinking? Or was her worst nightmare already unfolding? The bedroom was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Midnight had long passed, but Sophia remained awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind tangled in an endless loop of doubt and suspicion. Sleep was a distant thought, something she had learned to live without in the past few months. Daniel lay beside her, breathing evenly, his body relaxed in deep slumber. His absence from home had become so frequent that she almost forgot what it felt like to have him sleeping next to her. And yet, even now, when he was right there, he felt a million miles away. She turned her head, her eyes settling on his phone resting on the bedside table. For months, that device had been a wall between them. Always locked, always in his grip, never left unattended. Until tonight. A vibration broke the silence, a soft chime slicing through the thick air. The glow of the screen flashed once, illuminating the room. Sophia barely breathed. Daniel didn't move. Her heart pounded as she sat up slowly, the mattress shifting beneath her. The phone lay within reach, a beacon of everything she had feared but never had the courage to confirm. She hesitated. A part of her screamed to let it be, to ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest and roll over. But another part, one that had grown tired of excuses, of dismissing her own instincts, urged her forward. Her hand moved on its own. Fingers trembling, she picked up the phone. The screen was still illuminated, the message previewed at the top. Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. A chill crawled up her spine, freezing her in place. Her lungs tightened, refusing to fill. She read the message again, hoping she had imagined it, that her sleep-deprived mind was playing tricks on her. But the words didn't change. Babe, a heart emoji. Words that did not belong between husband and wife. At least, not when the wife wasn't the one receiving them. A sharp sting of betrayal hit her chest, knocking the breath from her. Her fingers clenched around the phone. Daniel had always been careful. Too careful. He never left his phone lying around, never let her see his screen when a notification popped up. He used to be open, used to hand her his phone without a second thought, but that had changed. The new passwords, the constant business trips, the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the late-night calls. She had pushed it all aside, convincing herself that she was overthinking, that her exhaustion was making her paranoid. But this was real. Slowly, as if moving through quicksand, she swiped the message open. The phone unlocked instantly. No password. It was as if he had stopped bothering to hide. Her pulse roared in her ears as she tapped the screen, opening the full conversation. A thread of messages stretched before her. Months of conversations she had never seen, never known existed. I miss you. Last night was incredible. You always know how to make me feel special. Wish I could hold you right now, she scrolled, her vision blurring, her fingers cold. Photos, dinner reservations at restaurants she had never been to, receipts for gifts, jewelry, expensive perfumes, a hotel booking. Her body trembled as she tapped on one of the images. It opened to reveal a picture of Daniel, smiling, his arm wrapped tightly around a woman she had never seen before. They stood in a dimly lit lounge, her fingers splayed across his chest, her lips pressed close to his ear. Her stomach turned violently. A sharp inhale threatened to claw its way out of her throat, but she swallowed it down. The evidence was right there, staring back at her. Her husband. The man she had sacrificed everything for. He had been living a double life. While she stayed home, folding his shirts, preparing his meals, waiting up for him to come back from his so-called business trips. He had been out with her. A stranger. A replacement. Her grip on the phone tightened. The anger came first, hot, blistering, rushing through her veins like a fire set loose. It burned away the excuses, the justifications, the moment she had ignored the red flags. Then came the heartbreak. It crushed her, heavier than she ever imagined betrayal could feel. Her knees felt weak. Her stomach churned. She had given up her career for him, let go of her dream because he had convinced her that they were the bigger dream, that their love was worth more than a title, that she wouldn't regret choosing him over her ambition. And yet, here she was, alone in the dark, holding proof that she had been nothing more than a convenience. Her breath shuddered out of her. Daniel shifted beside her, his body turning slightly, his arms stretching across the bed. She froze, her heart hammering. His breathing remained steady, deep. He hadn't woken up. Her eyes flicked to the phone again. She had a choice. Wake him now. Shove the phone in his face. Demand answers, demand the truth. Make him watch as she read every disgusting message aloud. Make him see what he had done to her, or something else, something colder, something that wouldn't just catch him off guard, but leave him drowning in his own mistake. Her lips pressed together, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. She placed the phone back on the table, exactly as it had been. She lay back down. Her mind, however, was far from sleep. Should she confront him or get revenge? The clock read 11:47 p.m. Sophia stood by the front door, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The house was dark, save for the dim glow of the kitchen light spilling into the hallway. The stew she had made earlier sat untouched on the stove, long gone cold. Outside, the familiar hum of an engine approached. Headlights flickered through the window, sweeping across the walls before disappearing as the car rolled into the driveway. Her fingers curled into fists. The lock turned, the door creaked, and then there he was. Daniel stepped inside, his movements careful, almost calculated, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, something sweet, floral, unfamiliar. His hair was slightly tousled, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. Sophia's stomach twisted. He looked up and saw her standing there, unmoving, eyes locked onto him like a blade pressed against his throat. A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, flashed across his face before he schooled his expression into something neutral. "Hey," he said casually, setting his keys on the table. "You're still up?" She didn't respond. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Long day. The client meeting ran over. You wouldn't believe." "Who is she?" The question cut through the air like a whip. Silence. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Sophia stepped forward, her voice steady, controlled. "Who is she?" He let out a short, breathy laugh, shaking his head. "Sophia, come on. You're really doing this right now?" She didn't flinch. His jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her hand shot out, grabbing his phone from the entryway table. She turned the screen toward him, the incriminating messages glaring under the dim light. His face paled. The confidence, the dismissiveness, it all cracked in an instant. Sophia waited. Daniel's lips parted, then closed. His fingers twitched at his sides, like he was trying to calculate a way out. And then, just like that, the mask slid back into place. His shoulders straightened, his expression smoothed over, and his mouth curled into a smirk. So slight, so cruel, it made her stomach lurch. He exhaled slowly, shrugging. So what? The words hit her like a slap. Her pulse pounded in her ears, disbelief washing over her. So what? She echoed, her voice shaking with quiet fury. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, as if they were discussing the weather. I gave you a comfortable life, didn't I? You have a nice home, no stress, nothing to worry about. What more do you want? The arrogance in his tone sent a fresh wave of rage surging through her veins. She took a step closer, her fists trembling at her sides. You promised me forever, Daniel scoffed. Forever? Sophia, be serious. You've been boring for months. You wake up, cook, clean, and then… what? You sit around waiting for me like some house cat. That's not a marriage, that's a job. Her breath caught in her throat. His voice turned colder. Do you know what it's like coming home to the same thing every night? No excitement, no passion. Just you, in the same pajamas, doing the same routine, asking me the same damn questions. Her vision blurred. He wasn't just confessing. He was blaming her. Daniel straightened, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. His expression was almost bored. You want the truth? Fine, I'm leaving. The room seemed to tilt. Sophia's breath shuddered out of her. Daniel adjusted his cuffs, his voice disturbingly calm. She's younger, and she actually appreciates me. The final blow. She felt it deep in her chest, the words twisting like a knife between her ribs. And then, before she could process it, before she could even take a full breath, he was walking toward the door. No hesitation, no second glance. Her world shattered in slow motion as the door swung open. And then, just like that, Daniel was gone. But karma has a way of making things right. The silence in the house was suffocating. Days blurred into nights, the emptiness pressing in from every corner. The bed felt too big. The air felt too still. The scent of Daniel's cologne had faded, but his betrayal lingered like a ghost, poisoning every memory, every moment. Sophia had cried the first night, the second, maybe even the third. But then, one morning, as the sun spilled through the curtains, something inside her shifted. Enough. She pulled herself out of bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, her mind raw from replaying his words over and over. But this time, she didn't let them break her. This time, she let them fuel her. Daniel had taken everything, stripped her of her dreams, convinced her to bury her ambitions for a love that never truly existed. But he had no power over her anymore. She walked to the closet, fingers grazing the untouched books on the shelf. The thick spine of her old medical textbooks felt foreign in her hands. Dust coated the edges, the pages stiff from years of neglect. She opened one, the familiar scent of ink and paper flooding her senses. And just like that, it was as if something deep within her had woken up. The fire, the hunger, the part of her that had been suffocated beneath the weight of someone else's expectations. She flipped through the pages, tracing the words with her fingertips. The words that once defined her. The words that would define her again. A deep breath, then another. She wasn't going to drown in her grief. She was going to rise. The first step was the hardest. Walking through the university doors again, feeling the weight of lost time pressing down on her shoulders. The faces were different, younger, brighter. She felt out of place, but she kept walking. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. She studied relentlessly, her days stretching into nights, her nights into early mornings. The exhaustion was crushing, the doubt suffocating, but she refused to stop. Some nights, she stared at the ceiling, wondering if she was making a mistake. If she was too late, if she had let too much slip through her fingers. But then she remembered his voice. I gave you a comfortable life. What more do you want? She wanted this. She wanted everything she had been forced to give up, and she was going to take it back. The years were unforgiving. There were days she could barely stand from exhaustion, nights where she collapsed onto the desk, falling asleep over open books. There were exams that drained her, professors that doubted her, moments that made her question whether she was strong enough to keep going. But she kept going. Through every setback, through every whisper that she was too old, too late, too broken to start over. She endured. She built herself back from the ashes of what Daniel had left behind. And then, one day, after years of relentless work, the impossible happened. She stood outside the hospital doors, wearing the coat she had once thought she would never wear again. Dr. Sophia Matthews, a name that had almost been erased. She had made it, but little did she know. Her moment of justice was near. Daniel had always been a man of confidence, a man who walked into a room and commanded attention, a man who had once held everything in the palm of his hand: wealth, power, and the unwavering belief that life would always bend in his favor. But life had a way of correcting arrogance, and Daniel was about to learn just how merciless karma could be. It started with whispers, a miscalculation in company funds, a questionable deal that didn't sit right with investors, a single lawsuit that spiraled into something bigger. The empire Daniel had built, the one he had flaunted so effortlessly, began to crack. At first, he brushed it off. Money problems were temporary. He had always been good at fixing things, spinning the narrative in his favor. But then the cracks deepened. More lawsuits, more accusations. The word fraud thrown around in hushed conversations. His business partners started distancing themselves. Clients withdrew their investments. Banks refused his calls. And then came the investigation. The government froze his assets. The media ran headlines painting him as a criminal. His once loyal employees whispered behind his back. He tried to cover it up, scrambling to keep up appearances. But the truth was undeniable. He was drowning, and no one was throwing him a lifeline. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, she left, his perfect younger mistress, the woman he had thrown his marriage away for, the one who had clung to his arm at every fancy dinner, who had whispered sweet nothings into his ear, who had made him feel powerful, desired, untouchable. She didn't even have the decency to break things off in person. A single text. "You're broke, I'm moving on." And just like that, she was gone. Daniel sat in his penthouse. No, not his penthouse anymore. The bank had seized it. He was just waiting for the official notice. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. Everything gone: the money, the business, the woman who was supposed to be his fresh start. And for the first time in his life, Daniel felt something unfamiliar: fear. The courtroom was suffocating. Daniel sat at the defense table, his expensive suit hanging looser than before. The weight loss had been rapid, stress gnawing at him from the inside out. The judge's voice echoed through the room, the sound of the gavel striking against wood sending a cold shiver down his spine. His lawyer whispered something to him, but the words barely registered. He was too busy staring straight ahead, his mind spinning. The charges were serious, the fines unbearable. The possibility of jail loomed like a shadow over him. How had it come to this? He used to be admired, envied, respected. Now he was just another cautionary tale. As he stood to leave, defeated, humiliated, he caught sight of her. Across the room, standing near the entrance, was the last person he ever expected to see. Sophia. She was dressed in a sharp, elegant suit, her hair pulled back, her presence commanding in a way he had never seen before. For a split second, their eyes met. And in that moment, Daniel felt it. Regret. Regret so thick it choked him. He had thrown her away like she was nothing, convinced himself that she was dull, that she was holding him back. But now, looking at her, strong, successful, completely untouchable, he realized the truth. She was never the problem. He was. And he had lost the best thing that ever happened to him. The knock at Sophia's door came late that evening. She hesitated before opening it, unsure who would visit at this hour. And then, as the door swung open, she froze. Daniel. But not the Daniel she remembered. This man looked defeated. The sharp confidence was gone, replaced by hollow eyes and slumped shoulders. His expensive suit looked out of place on his thinner frame, the exhaustion evident in the way he carried himself. "Hey, Sophia." His voice was rough, tired. She didn't say anything. He swallowed hard, glancing away before looking back at her. "I need your help." Will she forgive him? Or let karma finish the job? Comment below. The hospital halls buzzed with quiet efficiency. The air filled with the distant hum of machines and soft murmurs of medical staff moving with purpose. Behind a polished mahogany desk, Sophia Matthews sat, flipping through a patient chart with measured precision. The years had been kind to her. Success clung to her effortlessly, woven into the way she carried herself, poised, confident, untouchable. A gentle knock at the door. "Doctor?" "Matthews," a nurse peeked inside. "There's a patient requesting you specifically." She glanced up, pushing her reading glasses to the top of her head. "Who is it?" The nurse hesitated. He says you know him." Sophia arched a brow. "Name?" A pause. Then the nurse spoke it. "Daniel." Her breath stilled for just a moment, but her face betrayed nothing. She leaned back in her chair, fingers laced together. "Bring him in." The door opened, and in walked the ghost of a man she used to know. Daniel was unrecognizable. His once proud shoulders were slumped, his frame thinner than she remembered. The arrogance that had once shaped every step he took was gone. His suit was worn, his shoes scuffed, his hands fidgeting at his sides as if trying to hold on to some semblance of dignity. But it was the eyes that struck her the most. They weren't the same. Gone was the confidence, the smugness. Instead, there was something hollow, something broken. He stopped just inside the office, eyes flickering around before finally landing on her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, in a voice far weaker than she ever thought she'd hear from him. "Sophia." She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge the storm of emotions swirling beneath the surface. Instead, she simply asked, "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Lawson?" The use of his last name hit him like a slap. His throat bobbed. His voice cracked. "I'm sick," she nodded, flipping open the file on her desk. "Yes, I read your chart." He hesitated, as if waiting for something. Sympathy, warmth, maybe even the ghost of the woman who once loved him. But she gave him nothing, only silence. A silence that stretched so long it became unbearable. Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I know I don't deserve to be here," he admitted finally. "But I didn't know where else to go." She stood then, stepping around the desk. When she stopped in front of him, she tilted her head, observing him like he was just another case study. Her expression was unreadable. "You need treatment," she stated. "And as your assigned physician, I'll make sure you receive it." Something flickered across his face. "Sophia." "Dr. Matthews," she corrected. His breath stilled. She motioned toward the exam table. "Take a seat." Slowly, hesitantly, he did. The checkup was methodical, precise. Her hands moved with efficiency, but there was no trace of the warmth he once knew. She asked him the necessary questions, examined his vitals, and scribbled notes in her file. She never once met his eyes. Daniel sat there, suffocated by the distance between them. Not physical distance, something worse. A distance he knew, deep down, could never be bridged. Finally, she snapped the file shut. You'll be prescribed medication. Follow the instructions and you should recover in time. Daniel swallowed. Sophia, She stepped back. We're done here. A beat of silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, Do you hate me? She studied him for a long moment. Then, with the kind of quiet finality that sent a cold shiver down his spine, she simply said, No. And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him sitting there, drowning in the weight of his own regret. Some betrayals can't be undone. Do you think she made the right choice?
The morning air was crisp as Sophia stood by her office window sipping her coffee. The city stretched out before her, vibrant and alive. A stark contrast to the life she had once lived, a life built around someone who had never truly valued her. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't the same woman Daniel had walked away from all those years ago. She was stronger now, unshaken, untouchable. A soft knock at the door. A nurse peeked inside. Dr. Matthews, your next patient is waiting. Sophia nodded, setting down her mug. As she turned, her eyes landed on the television screen in the corner of her office. A news anchor spoke in a firm, professional tone, the breaking news banner flashing at the bottom. Daniel Lawson, once a prominent businessman, faces severe financial and legal troubles after multiple fraud accusations. Sources confirm his assets have been seized, leaving him bankrupt and facing possible jail time. A grainy clip played of Daniel, hounded by reporters as he exited a courthouse. His suit, once pristine, was wrinkled. His expression, once arrogant, was tight with frustration. The camera zoomed in as someone shoved a microphone toward him. Mr. Lawson, do you regret the choices that led to your downfall? He didn't answer. His face said it all. Sophia watched, tilting her head slightly. A flicker of amusement passed through her eyes before she turned away. She picked up the patient file from her desk and walked toward the door. But just before stepping out, she murmured under her breath, words only she could hear. Regret won't save you now. She left the room, not sparing the screen another glance. Betrayal is painful, it cuts deep, but in the end, karma has a way of setting things right. What do you think? Would you forgive or let them suffer? Comment below. Let's talk about it. And if you love this story, subscribe to Rare Tales Unfold for more thrilling stories like this. It's totally free. Hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. See you in the next one.